Warning, I am not a financial advisor, nor am I telling you what to do with your capital. Day trading and investing is extremely risky and should be treated as such. Results are also not typical, nor are they guaranteed. This video is only here to express my personal opinions. Enjoy. If you happen to stumble on this video, we're going to cover all the presidents all the way from 1969 all the way to the present and exactly how that has affected the U.S. economy and the dollar's strength depending on who's in office and what political party they're supporting. Now, we're not going to cover any of the boring stuff and the political stuff and the news and all that. We're just going to cover how that affects the charts and how that correlates with many other things. And you're going to want to stick around to the end because there are some crazy correlations off the charts that I think you guys will really be interested in. So make sure you stick until the end. Now, how we're going to make this work is, again, I'm only doing this to show you the effect it has on the actual charts. I'm not going to go through news and all that boring political stuff and speculation, whatever, but we're actually going to look into the past and see how these presidents have actually affected the U.S. dollar and the economy since their terms in office. And how we're going to play it out is I'm just going to mark with vertical lines who is in office, their political party, and how it affected the dollar. So just to get started, we're going to start, obviously you can see here, it is the dollar index. That's what DXY stands for if you're on tradingview.com. Definitely recommend you guys use this. I'm not sponsored by them, but they're really good to chart out data and all that stuff. So obviously the US dollar currency index, this basically just tells you the strength of the dollar, where it's at and how it's doing. And then, you can kind of just figure out how the economy is doing based off of this. So it only goes back to 1968. So that's where our presidency is going to start. And it starts with our beautiful Mr. Richard Nixon. And he served from 1969 to 74. So what we're going to do is we're just going to mark a vertical line to 1974, right around this area somewhere, right there. I mean, it doesn't have to be perfect, but as you can see in this bottom corner, it says September 1974. That works for me. And what we're going to do is mark it. And I'm going to mark it red as a Republican, blue as a Democrat. And then that way we can kind of just see how this correlates with the charts. And it gets pretty interesting as we move on and forward. So one thing I do want to note or tell you guys is as this shows and just how the economy responds to who's in office, if a Republican is president, typically the U.S. dollar will go down. The value of the dollar will drop. And now you're going to keep that in mind. And as a Democrat, it's going to go up. So remember, Republican down, Democrat up. Just for the currency. Doesn't mean they're a good or bad president. Just keep that in mind. And that's kind of what I want to show you as far as today. So we won't actually look back on this until we're complete, but let's just continue to chug along. So the next person is Gerald Ford. Gerald Ford served from 74 to 1977. So we're just going to mark that vertical line again to 1977, which is right around here somewhere. And we're going to mark that Ford. And Ford was also a Republican. All right, there we go. We're just going to put him right in that little box. We're going to make it a little bigger. And then obviously, as you can see, his again, he started here. This is where Nixon and Ford kind of came off. They had a little bit of a down run. Ford had some rise, didn't really go anywhere, and then it started to plummet back down because, again, the Republicans typically send the economy and the U.S. dollar down. But what is interesting is the next president we have, and that is Jimmy Carter. And obviously, Jimmy Carter was a Democrat. So we're just going to mark it like that. And then we're going to change this to blue just so you guys can tell the difference. And Jimmy Carter served from 1977 to 1981. So again, we're just going to mark that off somewhere right around there. And that's where Carter gets his little spot. So again, as we can see, you're starting to see a little bit of a correlation. Richard Nixon serves his term, starts right here, and then just absolutely plummets, sends the dollar to, obviously, all-time lows because there's nothing else to compare it to. rises up a little before the end of his term. As Ford takes over, another Republican, the dollar plummets again, rises back but doesn't come up back past this high, and then starts to plummet again. Typically, when presidents change, whether it's Democrat to Republican or vice versa, whoever the last president was, that's kind of where the dollar is going to keep going, because presidents can't really do much in their first 6 months. I mean, they have to change a lot of things that the last president did. So obviously the dollar keeps going, hits all-time lows. It kind of just plateaus and consolidates right here. And then obviously, as him being a Democrat, the dollar does rise towards the end of his term, reaching new highs for the last, almost 10 years. And then the next person we have is Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan served 2 terms from 81 to 89. Now this one is extremely interesting. So let me just mark up where he finished his term, which is 1989. So right around there somewhere. All right, perfect. So one thing to know about Reagan was that he was a Democrat before. So in his first few, in his career, in the first part of his career, he was a Democrat. As he became president, he actually switched to being a Republican. And when you look onto this chart, it doesn't really make sense. But let me just kind of explain what's going on. Okay, so like I said before, Ronald Reagan was a Republican. But prior to being a Republican and being president, he was a Democrat. So my thoughts, obviously, I don't know exactly why, but I'm assuming that has some influence to do with this, because in his first term, the dollar kept rising, which, as we know, Democrats raise the U.S. economy and raise the dollar. So maybe that had some influence to do. He had a lot of Democratic friends or people in office or whatever it may be. But during the second part of his election, right here, you can see that it just rose. And then him being a Republican, I think later in his presidency, he started to dig more roots or plant more roots into a Republican Party type style, which obviously sends the dollar down. Now, another thing to notice is right here in this time, this was 1985. And what happened in 1985 was the end of the Cold War was right around here, around, I think, like 89 or 91, towards the end of his presidency. But right here, the Soviet Union in 1985 got a new leader, and I'm assuming that changed a lot, because if you just look at the chart, it just went and just kept rising and rising and rising. March of 1985 comes, and the dollar just plummets. So obviously, we were in a lot of talks, a lot of war. The Cold War, so we weren't really fighting. But we had a lot of stuff going on with Russia, and when they got a new leader, a leader that actually stuck around for a while, that completely changed the trajectory of where this dollar was going. So obviously, I don't really know what exactly was happening throughout this term, but towards the later half of his term, we can see that it does plummet with him being a Republican. That makes sense. But with him being a Democrat prior to being a president, I'm assuming that has some influence on why this rose. And then, again, we don't really know what's going on. But let's continue to move on because it gets a little more accurate as we go on throughout the years. So after Reagan, we have George H.W. Bush, which served from 89 to 93. So let's mark out our horizontal line. All right, so we have Bush right here, who is another Republican, and we're just going to put him right in the middle. So as we can see, as Reagan kind of took over, or towards the end of his presidency, they switched over right about here. He rebounded a little bit. Then Bush took over, who was another Republican, and as we know, Republicans send the dollar down, which we see the dollar hit all-time lows, tries to rebound, and just sets new all-time lows, which obviously is what the Democrats have been doing, which is what the Republicans have been doing. They send the dollar down. Right after George Bush is Bill Clinton, who is a Democrat, and he serves from 93 to 2001. So let's mark it up from 2001, which is right around here. And we're just going to mark this as Clinton. All right, so as we can see, so he takes over somewhere around this area. Obviously, from going from a Republican to Democrat, the first part of the presidency isn't always the hottest because they're two different belief systems and whatever. So the dollar kind of starts to plummet, but then rebounds and just continues to fly up and up and up and up, and flies to these highs towards the end of his presidency. So basically throughout his entire presidency, the dollar rises, which makes sense because he is a Democrat. So that is going along with our theory so far. Right after Bill Clinton, we have another George W. Bush, which served 2 terms as well from 01 to 09. So let's mark that up, and we're going to mark this to 09, which is right around here somewhere. And I think this is probably the most evident one. This is the easiest one to spot. Another Bush, a Republican. And as soon as George Bush takes over, literally, it just plummets. The dollar just plummets and falls and falls and falls and falls and literally creates all-time lows, at least from the time dating back to 1969. The dollar has never been at its lowest, and it makes sense because a Republican is in office. And as we know, Republicans send the dollar down, Democrats send it up. And again, I'm not saying I'm a Democrat, not saying I'm a Republican. I'm just saying it's interesting to see how the dollar moves with who's in office and what political party they're serving. And again, stick around to the end because this is going to have a lot of correlation with things involving investments and where a lot of the U.S. and our economy is going to go, which you may not see as important, but I'll show you in the big picture. So as we continue after Bush, we obviously have Obama, who serves another 2 terms, 09 to 2017. Let's mark that up. We mark that over here. Okay, so we have Barack Obama, who serves 2 terms right here. At the beginning of his presidency, the dollar kind of just stagnates, doesn't really go anywhere. Towards the second half, the start of the second, end of the first, we can see that the dollar just rises. And obviously, that's what Democrats do. And for our last one, I don't even have to look at this one because we have our beautiful president right now, Mr. Trump, which we all love. So obviously he is a Republican, and as we can see, as soon as he took over, the dollar starts to fall and plummet. He does regain a little bit of power or a little bit of strength back then into the economy, the currency. But we have been seeing a trend in the last 3 presidents where they've served 2 terms, right? Bill Clinton, George Bush, Barack Obama. They've all served 2 terms. So if this trend continues, can Donald Trump serve a 2nd term? If the trend continues, then can we see the dollar plummet? Because if we've seen in the past, Republicans typically send the dollar down. So let's say Trump does take over in office, he serves a 2nd term, then can the dollar come below these lows? Can it come back to these previous lows? It's all speculation, but it's interesting to see what's going to happen. So I'll take a screenshot of this because I think it's really interesting, and I would assume some of you would really like to see this. So I will just take a picture of this, and this will be in the link in the descriptions down below. And as we can see, just kind of the big picture, right? Remember that the Republicans are sending the dollar down. Democrats are doing the opposite, sending it up. And as we can see this all the way back in 1969, it's crazy to see how this actually correlates with our economy and the strength of the dollar and all that stuff. Now, like I said, if you guys have stuck until the end, I want to show you something that's actually really interesting and I think is really important. So with the strength of the dollar, many of you will think that's not important. It doesn't really affect me. I don't really care for Democrat or Republicans in office. But in terms of investing and knowing where to put your money, it's really important because I'm going to show you a couple examples. Okay, so what we have here, obviously keep this in mind because, like we said before, Republicans down, Democrats up for the dollar. Now, why that's important and why I think you guys need to know this is because when the dollar or the economy or anything in the U.S. starts to strengthen, people become more confident in the U.S., in the dollar, in our currency, and whatever. So people will start to take their money out of safe havens such as gold, silver, cryptocurrency. Another safe haven is the Japanese yen. When the currency and our economy is strong, people want to invest back into it because that's good for the economy, which means stocks are on the rise, U.S. economy, we want to invest back in businesses, blah, 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 stuff like that. So the true is for vice versa. If the economy is starting to fall and bad things are happening, people don't want to keep their money in something that's failing. So they take their money out of stocks, they take their money out of the businesses, and they put them in something else that is going to go against the dollar. So let's think about this. If the dollar is going down, if our economy is doing bad, whatever it may be, like we said, if we're Republicans in office, typically the dollar starts to fall. We are in a weekly time frame, so this is very long term, but it's good to keep this in mind. If a Republican's in office, typically the dollar falls, which Trump's in office, Republican, dollar is falling. Now the opposite is true for gold, because when people don't have trust in the U.S. economy or dollar anymore, they put their money into precious metals, and gold is one of those. So let's check the correlation. From the start of January 2017, the dollar starts falling like crazy, right? From the start of 17, it just starts falling. Let's see what happens over here. Now remember, this isn't perfect, but it's pretty damn accurate. Okay, so from the start of 17, we can see as the dollar goes down, then gold starts to come up. And as the dollar starts to retrace, the opposite happens for precious metals, right? And we can look at this on another time frame. We can look at this bigger picture. But anytime that the dollar starts to do worse, gold starts to do the opposite. So if the dollar's doing bad, gold's doing very well. Now, another crazy thing is Bitcoin. A lot of you may be Bitcoin believers or cryptocurrency or whatever, but think of this as digital gold. It's the same thing. When the dollar started to do very bad, then that's exactly when Bitcoin started to do amazing, right? We go to the start of 2017 and we have this absolute massive rise. Everyone knows that Bitcoin's going to 100,000, and then what happens? It just starts to plummet. People start to fail, and so when cryptocurrency and Bitcoin's not working anymore, what's happening? Well, the U.S. dollar is starting to go on the rise again, right? When there's strength in the dollar, people have confidence, so they go back into that. When there's disbelief and people don't trust it, they go and resort to safe havens such as gold or digital gold or whatever it may be. So this is something to keep in mind for the future, because maybe it doesn't affect you directly with who's in president or what political party is in control, but in terms of buying and selling, remember, investing 101, you want to buy low, sell high. So if we know that and we're looking to invest into cryptocurrency or gold or safe havens or stuff like that, we want to make sure that, one, if we're going to invest into the stock market, the last thing we want to do is invest at all-time highs, because if you look at the US 30, you can see that we're at all-time highs right now, right? And this is basically a symbol for the Dow Jones, which is showing basically how well stocks are moving, how well the U.S. economy is moving in the right direction. And going back to investing 101, the last thing you want to do is buy at all-time highs, because there's not a lot of room for price to continue to rise, because price always, no matter what, has to retrace. And look at what has been happening. This has just been rising and rising and rising. And so you're telling me it's a good idea to buy at these all-time highs? Because if we take a look back at Bitcoin, what happened when people were buying at all-time highs, right? Do you think it's a good idea to invest in Bitcoin here or down here? Here or down here? So it's the same exact thing when you're looking at stocks. Do you want to invest in stocks when you know that there needs to be a retracement or a fall? Well, let's wait. Or maybe this is a good time to start buying. And, this all just correlates with each other. I just thought this was really interesting. Thought it was a really interesting video to make. It definitely blew me away when I first saw this. I thought it was super important. But if you guys think that this, theory is true, or any of this stuff is very interesting, or you found anything knowledgeable out of this, leave a comment down below. I would love to see what you guys thought of this video, because I thought this was a super interesting one, and I'd love to get your feedback on it. And if you haven't yet, make sure to subscribe and leave a like on this video, so you can continue to see cool videos like this. And until next time, Stay woke.